you go. Steve, thank you.
Okay, we are all here. Yes, thank you, Mr. Hine. Great. It's 1 o'clock. I guess let's roll. Let's start with the roll call. Mr. Kennedy.
Here.
Ms. Henning.
Here.
Mr. Platt.
Here.
Mr. Fine.
Here.
Meekly here. Okay, we're at full strength. By way of disclosures, anybody have anything they want to share with us? Mr. Kennedy.
None.
Ms. Platt.
None.
Ms. Henning.
None.
Fine.
None.
Okay, I would offer that I have received valuable input from individual members of the commission prior to putting the draft letter together, for which I thank those of you who did send me something. There's been no group discussion that I'm aware of, so I think we're in bounds. And that discussion will take place today. So just by way of everybody in the right place. By way of introduction, for the record, we are here to consider, amend, and potentially approve a letter to the applicant's engineering firm for the Howell Acres subdivision final plat application SD 1221. The draft letter was posted along with the notice for this meeting. The first 4 paragraphs of that letter outline the procedural history of the application, so I won't go through that here today. I think we're trying to keep this to be a pretty short meeting. As lead author of our reply letter, it would be appropriate to place myself more in the discussion of the letter than in the procedural guidance for this meeting. So with his acceptance, I would be happy to cede the gavel for this afternoon's meeting to Vice Chair Kennedy. What says Mr. Kennedy?
I would be happy to do so, but I think it might be a little bit smoother if either of you that are in the room were to chair. It's a little bit awkward when there's 3 live and 2 of us remote.
Yeah. Well, okay, I guess I can continue here and you guys can kibitz at will. How about that?
I had planned to be there, but I've got a little bit of a cold and thought maybe the rest of you'd like to pass. So
no, I was happy when my children cleared junior high and I ceased to be mixing it up with everybody in town. So thank you for your consideration. Okay, so you've got well, all right, let me introduce where I think we are, and my remarks might go on a little bit, but for first question, there was a draft that was posted with the notice, and then that has been significantly reworked. So have you all seen the draft that went out this morning? I realize that's short notice, but
I have.
you have, Mr. Fine? Did you see that?
I have. Yes.
And Mr. Kennedy? Keith, did you see the one that we sent out most recently?
Yeah.
Okay, thumbs up.
He's just muted.
Okay, so we won't have to read through it, but for the record and for the benefit of our audience, let me go through that for us quickly. Following preparation of my first draft, the one that was posted with the notice, which was focused on the requested specific response to the consultant's letter of November 16th, I went back and listened to our November 29th meeting. Glutton for punishment, I guess. But in fact, I was pleased to find it was more productive than I had remembered. In fact, I think it provided substantial technical guidance to the applicant going forward. In fact, I think the November 29 work session could have obviated the need for this letter we're discussing today, but the applicant's consultant and lawyer wanted things written down. So here we are. We didn't spend much time on the consultant's November 16 letter at the November 29th meeting, I'll concede. It was the consultant letter that we received just very shortly before that meeting was largely off point, in my opinion. But what I tried to do with that meeting on the 29th was to reach through to the underlying technical deficiencies we had identified back in May. On the redraft of today's reply letter, which amends the one that was posted earlier, I've attempted to do the same thing. So if you've all looked at that, let me just outline where I took our response, again, for your consideration, and then, of course. So what the current letter does, I hope, One, it declines to argue points which by the consultant's own representation are irrelevant. So if somebody tells me it's 30 miles to Cheyenne, I think we're all inclined to say, no, it's not, but we're not going to Cheyenne. So we don't have to grapple with a lot of the material that was in that consultant letter of November 16th. Second, I've added specific sites to the applicable DEQ regulations to make the important point that we are not expanding our analysis beyond what is required under existing state regulation. We are not creating new hurdles for applicants to get over. We're not proposing new compliance criteria. Now, we might want to at some point in the future, and we might in the future. We have talked about things like a cumulative impact analysis, but that isn't what we're doing here. So just so we're all clear, this speaks to some of the concerns that Ms. Getz brought to our last meeting. What we are simply insisting on is that we be provided a scientifically credible investigation and review under existing DEQ regulations. And provided is a key word there. Maybe that scientifically credible review exists, but if it does, it has not been shared with the commission. Third, I've added those elements into the letter, which the consultant said at our November 29th meeting, basically, yeah, I could do that. And in that sense, this letter is a formal version of please do. Now, you want to see it in writing rather than just coming out of that meeting, but that was the sense of my thinking that meeting actually did provide the guidance that was required. And then I've also added some preliminary research along those veins of, oh yeah, we could do that to help perhaps jumpstart that process. Fourth, the letter offers an alternative path to resolution through DEQ. We are not trying to supplant DEQ's authority here. If they were to credibly say to us, we've looked at all the factors, we've adjusted those for which we think consult was in error, if there were any, and here's where and why, and here's why we think the groundwater impacts of this subdivision will be acceptable, that would be great. And we, at least I, would vote for approval with a clear conscience. But fifth and finally, the letter invites the applicant to allow additional time for this process to play out. We gave it 6 months originally, but for whatever reasons, personnel changes, personal issues, good, bad, or different, that timeline really only started 45 minutes before our November 16 meeting. Now, that's not a legal timeline, and it's my understanding that it's completely up to the applicant, but I think giving that process the time it deserves is the best option. But again, I understand that's entirely up to the applicant. That the November 29th meeting was a excellent suggestion from Mr. Ralph. And I was, as I say, I was pleased with the attendance that we got at that meeting. And then as I went back and listened to it, I thought it was a productive meeting. Okay, so there's my elaborate introduction to the letter that's in front of you. How do you proceed? A motion to accept
Mr.
that.
Chairman.
Yes, go ahead.
Mr. Chairman, I see that Jennifer Kern is on, and I had actually, this brought up a question in my mind, and I spoke with her earlier today, so she was prepared. So Jennifer, could you tell us the interaction between Wyoming Statute 185307 and the delegation agreement that we have in place with DEQ and how that affects both of these cases?
Mr. Chairman and Commissioner Kennedy. So I did look into that a little bit, and I will tell you, Matt and I discussed this issue as a whole a little before he left, but not super in depth. So to answer your question, Commissioner Kennedy, I think 185307 provides those timelines for submission of applications and all of those things. The delegation agreement is authorized under 3511-304, which that delegation agreement designates, as you're aware, the authority of the county to regulate wastewater systems in conjunction with the rules and regulations that it promulgates. So having not been well versed, and I will tell you the septic criteria, I have no idea how to make heads or tails of that. But what my caution to this board would be is, and maybe it already does, and I just don't know enough to know, all of the questions that you're asking and all of the additional information that you're requesting, so long as you can tie that back to the requirements in the subdivision permit section in D, or for Chapter 4, Section 5D, which I believe deals with the sewage disposal systems, and then again in E. So long as your additional questions and additional information can be tied back to those criteria, then it makes sense to me that those are additional requirements you can ask of an applicant. I don't know if that entirely answers your question, Chairman
Yeah.
Kennedy, or Commissioner Kennedy, I'm sorry.
Yeah. Mr. Kennedy?
It does. Thank you.
We have two other people want to talk, but let me just follow up on that briefly, Ms. Curran. Is it clear to you that we are asking for additional information? As I said in my introduction, I'm framing this as we're not asking for anything that DEQ doesn't ask for. We just want to see it. And what we get from DEQ is just a binary and blind response. So are we even in the territory of trying to require additional material? Or have you got a thought on that, Ms. Curran?
Hinckley, I don't know how to answer that because I don't understand septic and wastewater enough to be able to look at your letter and say, oh, that applies to this section of the regulations. I'm sure you probably do have that information. I don't. So I don't know how to answer that, and I'm sorry.
No, I appreciate a fair and honest, somewhat humble answer. May I suggest that this letter was written from a technical point of view, and we were asked to share with the applicant the 5 members of the planning and zoning concerns with the technical analysis. Now, if the applicant chooses to respond in kind, that's one thing. If the applicant chooses to respond, you can't make me, I guess I see that as a different discussion than we're here for today. Is that fair?
I think that's fine. The one suggestion that I would make would be that within your letter, if you can tie your questions to the section of the regulations that the question would fall under.
Okay, and
I don't.
You know, by the regulations, you mean the DEQ regulations or our own?
I was speaking of our own.
Okay. And I did not do that. And it's of concern that we are simply marching under DEQ's regulations, which is the way I tried to frame the letter. Again, I'm asking that of Ms. Curran.
I believe, though, in our regulations, doesn't it also relate back to the DEQ standards? As I'm flipping here.
Mr. Bird?
As in our wastewater.
What was the question? Well, the question is whether we can march forward to analyze the Howell subdivision under the DEQ regulations. It's kind of separately from our own. I'm not quite sure how to frame the question.
And my question, David, I'm sorry to interrupt you,
No,
Chairman.
go ahead, please.
Was what I had asked was if we could relate the questions in the draft letter back to the provisions of our regulations that they would fall under. And I thought there was a section in the subdivision section that talked about compliance with DEQ standards, but I don't know where that is off the top of my head. I was flipping.
Okay, so the minimum standards for subdivisions, that's where it talks about doing basically submitting the report to DEQ and receiving a recommendation from them, which I'm not sure what chapter that is in the regulations. But I guess the DEQ report and the subdivision application, these are all one thing. I don't know if we can do them separately. You know, I mean, because our review authority comes from the subdivision application, not from what they're doing at the state, you know. So I guess I don't know if that answers your questions or.
Well, okay, so to try to get a way to proceed here, Ms. Kern, what do you think of my suggestion that we're here today to express the technical concerns of the P&Z, which the letter was drafted to do, and if the applicant chooses to challenge our authority to ask them anything, can I separate those two? Or have we committed ourselves somehow by preparing this letter?
Jennifer, I'll just add my thoughts on that. Maybe. So we prepared this letter for what planning and zoning has reviewed in the chapter 23 report. So as I believe Mr. Ayers, he's not here to defend himself or whatever, but from what I understood, he said at our last meeting is that Albany County has the right to review subdivision applications. The DEQ report that is required as part of this is when DEQ looks at that, they provide us a recommendation. They are a recommending body. And therefore, from my understanding, planning and zoning can look at what they're recommending. They can look at that report and then with using their best judgment, determine if those things have met the criteria that we want them to meet. You know, DEQ does the reviewing of the actual chapter 23 report. However, that's information that's presented to this board, the planning commission, to review as well. It's not that I don't think there's anything that keeps the planning and zoning commission from reviewing this, asking for additional information for clarification. At least in my opinion, and I'm no attorney. So, Jennifer, if you have any other thoughts, I will follow yours.
Okay,
No, you're good. You're good. And I do agree with you. I think DEQ's letter is a recommendation. It's not necessarily binding on this commission, nor is it binding on the commissioners. So I think this board does have the ability to look at those standards.
Okay, Mr. Platt, you had something.
Yes, I think you can do that.
Which
Just a second, I'm sorry, I don't know quite finished with Jennifer. You threw something in there at the end. I went ahead, sorry.
Oh, it's okay. I was gonna say, so I think you can certainly do that and look at those other regulations and for the report that was provided as part of the chapter 23, and then do some analysis of that. A request to tie into that would be then when you're doing that analysis to tie it back to our regulations. So whether your questions are related to, I don't know, I'm reading now from the in chapter 4. If no public sewage disposal system is proposed, then it should have the on-lot sewage disposal information, including percolation testing, adequacy and feasibility of separation distances from existing water supplies or from individual wells, adequacy of soil conditions, and separation from groundwater. So I think if it's possible, I don't believe it's necessary, but if it's possible to tie your questions on the chapter 23 report back to those requirements within the subdivision requirements, then it just connects that final dot as to why the questions are being asked.
Oh, okay, but let's be clear, we are not proposing to make a decision on the Howell Acre subdivision today by any means, in which case I think many of these issues would be appropriate to that discussion, in contrast to this one, which if you wanted to throw a huge umbrella over it, it would be, we're looking at DEQ and saying, huh? And that seems like fair territory. Mr. Platt, what did you have to offer?
I was going to follow on David's comments. I went back and reviewed our meeting also the monthly meeting, and Matt was very specific about saying we don't have to take DEQ's recommendation, whether they recommend adversely or non-adversely, nor do the county commissioners. And I'd like to follow that on by suggesting that we presume that this letter will be accepted in good faith by the recipients, and that we move forward and not get bogged down in these legal issues.
Well, that would be my preference, but some of that's up to the applicant. I think, I mean, we've had now 2 special meetings for no other purpose than to help Mr. Howell proceed forward with his application. We approved the preliminary back in May with the conditions so that we weren't slowing it down as it moved towards final. So let us all understand there's nobody that I'm aware of on this commission that's saying we want to deny this application, but just as we've been aggressively schooled over the last 2 years that we have to have a darn good reason to vote no on anything, I think we should have darn good reasons to vote yes. I mean, let's, as we picture this voice on our shoulder saying, don't deny this or you're exposing yourself to lawsuits and charges of arbitrary and capricious, et cetera, et cetera. The same could be true on the opposite side. If someone could challenge our acceptance of it, saying you voted yes on this thing and your technical basis is very suspicious, that looks arbitrary and capricious. I mean, it could go either way. So again, I think we need a solid basis for either a denial or an acceptance. And right now, we do not have a solid basis.
Oh, no, well, let me clarify my remarks. I wasn't talking to that at all. I was just saying, I think this letter is good as it is, and we can presume that it'll be received rather than they will say, well, you don't have to. Anyway, that's what I'm saying.
No, and I wasn't arguing with that. I was trying to frame this as we have two very separate things going on here. Might we hear from the applicant? Would you like to have an argument on legal merits, or would you like to proceed with us trying to ferret out the answers to our technical questions?
This is Megan Getz. Can you hear me okay?
Yes, go ahead. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Chairman. The applicant is not taking a position right now. The applicant, as noted to Mr. Gertsch, continues to believe that these requirements exceed the scope of regulations and what Planning Commission can require of an applicant. Notwithstanding that, if there are specific questions you want answered, please provide them and we will determine if we can answer them. Our objection as to the proprietary nature of asking them continues to be our position. But we want to cooperate. I mean, we're trying to figure this out.
Okay, thank you.
I think we should accept that offer of cooperation.
I appreciate that. And again, it's the applicant's call, and as you'll see, Ms. Getz, have you, well, I guess you haven't seen the letter that is in front of us. It's an amended version. So you can't speak knowledgeably to that. Am I correct that you have not seen this, the latest version? Ms. Getz?
Yeah, excuse me, Mr. Chairman, I have no idea what you're talking about, and I didn't even know this meeting was happening until a couple hours ago.
Megan, were you contacted by Jared at all?
I'm so sorry. I didn't know who that was.
So that was the,
Jared Ralph?
wait, who's asking the question? She's not recognizing your
It's
question.
me. I'm Joe.
Oh, hi, Joe. Yes, Jared Ralph is who made me aware this morning, a couple hours
So
ago.
I sent him the letter. If he can email that to you, I don't know if he has, but it is the amended version that I sent to him.
Yeah, Megan, so you should have that in the email. But we also, I was wondering if Levi had a good chance to look at that as well.
Well, and at some point, the decision is ours whether to proceed with the letter. I mean, that's why we're here today, and I'm feeling somewhat like we prevailed upon our commission members mightily. So,
Mr. Chairman, my team and I will respond if we choose to a final letter. So I would just ask Jared and Levi, just hold your comments to any questions. We don't want to respond to drafts right now. So just,
okay,
we'll let the commission do what it's going to do, and then we can get together and decide if we're going to respond.
I think that's sage advice. I appreciate your.
Yeah, we should send them a final letter. Not a draft.
No, I thought that there was guidance provided by the November 29 meeting. The applicant and their team of advisors felt that it should proceed in writing, and so we are now attempting to do so. And in fact, the redraft of the letter was trying to move away from some tit for tat technical discussion and focus on the things that we think, and I would argue DEQ thinks are important, and move this thing forward. All right, so that said, let's get back to the point of this special meeting, which was, what do the P&Z commissioners think of the letter? And should we amend it? Should we send it? What's your pleasure?
Mr. Chair,
Ms. Stein?
I move that we accept the letter as it has been presented to us and make it a final draft and send it out.
Thank you. Is there a second?
I second.
Motion by Stein, second by Platt, to accept the letter as distributed most recently and send it on its way. Discussion of that motion. Mr. Kennedy, let's just do the round robin. Ms. Platt, Ms. Hanning, I'm sorry.
Mr. Chair, I would offer some amendments. I'm sorry, I don't have the letter in front of me. But in terms of responding to Ms. Curran's advice about tying it back to the regulations, I do think that in the subdivision rules, what's the correct full name of the subdivision rules? Plating and subdivision rules. Section 4, chapter 4, section 5, number 2. A is asking for a report that evaluates the adequacy of the proposed sewer system in relation to a number of things, but including the proposed land and water uses in the vicinity of the subdivision. Right. One of the things in your letter is pointing out that we're not looking at the first water. And so I would say that chapter 4, section 5D2A has not been met because they're not looking at the shallow water. And I think we can tie things as well to that same section. Regard also D, little d, that the utilization of the wastewater treatment facility. Oh, sorry, wrong one. Thinking on the fly here. That the study will demonstrate that the operation of the sewer system will not affect the suitability or safety of the proposed water supply. And again, we're not looking at that first water here. And so in my mind, we have not met the elements of chapter 4, section 5, D2.
Okay, can you,
Where would we put that in here?
I guess I'm looking to come out of this meeting with a letter, but I don't want to force that through. I'm
Chairman.
to have another special meeting to do that. Can you offer an amendment on the fly, or what's your pleasure? And then while you're looking at that, here's a pencil. If you think you can put something together quickly, and I don't, this is not the great way to go. Ms. Curran, what was your sage wisdom here?
I was gonna say, Chairman Hinckley, if don't amend the letter today, but the members of the commission between now and your regular meeting can go through and each of you make the determination where you believe that it fits, so that if there are questions, that's a discussion that could be brought up in any motion that were to be made at a meeting where approval was in front of this commission.
Okay, would that be
Yeah.
acceptable? I mean, I think that would.
It would be less messy.
And that would defer our legal discussions to a different forum.
We're looking for information, Karen.
Right. Okay, so back to the motion on the floor. Are there amendments? And again, I don't want anyone to think that you have to do this. If it's more appropriate to amend it and we can't amend it here, then we will have to defer. But if we can, we should. So what's the pleasure of the commission? Further discussion of the motion,
I have something.
please.
Just for the benefit of other commission members, I'd like to say that I did have extensive back and forth with Chairman Hinckley in the drafting this letter. And I deliberately tried to play something of a devil's advocate and try to think about how this might be seen by the recipient. And I wanted the letter to have a style and tone that would be perceived as much as possible in a collegial manner. I'm not trying to force anyone to do anything, but certainly not hostily. So I just want to say that, and I think this is a good final comment. I'm very satisfied.
Thank you. Others, Mr. Stein, you have a thought to weigh in on here?
Yeah, my motion was intended to create exactly the discussion we're having now. I think it's two separate things. Do we have the authority? Yes. That's what we've been told. That's what council has advised us. I don't see any reason to change that. I realize Ms. Curran did not have extensive consultations with Mr. Ayers, but Mr. Ayers is quite certain, and I think Commissioner Platt, has already quoted. The authority issue is something we have to operate, and being told by our legal counsel from the county that we have the authority to do this. I don't know that that has to be referred to in a letter particularly, but I will be guided by more wise and knowledgeable people in that regard. I see nothing in the letter that is asking for any technical material beyond what would normally be supplied. If it hasn't been supplied in the past and people have approved things, we can't go back and fix that. What we can do is ask for a reasonable set of information that allows us to make a considered judgment and approve things going forward or not approve it. My last point would be, I'm unclear why we're hurrying. I truly am. I mean, for whatever reason, you sent a perfectly, what I would say is perfectly reasonable letter. I did not draft the letter, I did not see the letter, but in reading it in retrospect, I think, yeah, perfectly reasonable letter to ask to cure some of the technical deficiencies. The agency in question, the company in question, waited 6 months and slid the letter under the door by admission that it only took 2 hours to put together. I don't think that's the way to do business, and I don't think this commission should be responding in kind to an unprofessional and hurried and untimely response. I am heartened by the suggestion that we take this up in our next regular meeting. I think calling special meeting after special meeting defeats the purpose of what we're supposed to do, which is give due consideration to submission. And that's what I have to say.
Good, thank you. Let me just respond briefly to that. My understanding is that this will be on the agenda for our meeting next week. And it is my understanding, and I invite Mr. Gertz to correct me if I'm wrong, it's decision time. Unless the applicant agrees to extend the review process, as I characterized it earlier, to capture what we hoped would be the benefit of that 6-month period, we will be asked to vote yay or nay on their final plat application. I feel like these letters in both these special meetings have been developed and conducted to avoid an adverse decision on this application. So we will. I agree. It would be great to take a little more time to do this. I don't know that that decision is ours to make. So is there further discussion of the motion on the floor? Going once, going twice. Mr. Kennedy, how vote you?
Aye.
Ms. Hanning,
I,
Mr. Platt,
I,
Mr. Fine,
Aye.
Hinckley, aye. It's unanimous. It's done. We would direct staff to send this letter to Mr. Ralph, I think is how you set it up. Now let me just as a final thought, and we don't need a response, and certainly not a debate, but for your benefit, Ms. Getz and those who may not have seen the letter, let me read the second to the last paragraph in the record. Another important point that was discussed at the November 29 work session was the role of DEQ reviewers, which suggests a potential alternative route to resolution. The consultant suggested he could search their files for DEQ communications with DEQ regarding the Howell subdivision chapter 23 report. That could be helpful in better understanding the depth of their review. Similarly, I have initiated a discussion with DEQ hydrogeology staff regarding their review of that report, pointing out our concerns and seeking background information on their, quote, no adverse, close quote, conclusion. Were DEQ technical staff to demonstrate that all factors had been appropriately considered, that would provide adequate basis for our approval of the final plat. A cooperative effort among DEQ staff, the applicant, and P&Z to properly evaluate the groundwater impacts of the proposed subdivision might be the best route to both Howell Acres final plat approval and long-term resolution of P&Z concerns with chapter 23 analyses. So for what it's worth, we warmly invite participation in a cooperative effort with DEQ to get to the bottom of these issues. Thank you. Anybody else have any statements, issues they want to bring before this special meeting of planning and zoning? Hearing, yes, Mr. Stein.
For Mr. Gert, is this, in your knowledge, been done before? This back and forth?
Yeah, Mr. Chair, Mr. Thine. This is the first time we've honestly had folks that had the technical expertise to look at the chapter 23 reports like this. So in this case, this has never happened other than this specific commission, since I've been here at least. Now, there have been back and forths on other issues in the past, you know, a lot of times roads or some of these other issues. So it's not uncommon that we do have a little bit of back and forth, but on this specific issue, that's the first time. So, yeah.
Okay, just making sure that I understood the playing field. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Platt.
I do have a suggestion, which I'll throw out the commissioners for a thought, perhaps our next meeting. Given that we do have a special circumstance where we have professional entities that pertains to these water and sanitary water issues. And I went back and again, listened to our last meeting, and a comment that Mr. Ralph made resonated me more strongly than it did the meeting itself, where he pointed out correctly and validly that on all the aspects of these applications to move forward, they're getting reviewed and there's back and forth taking place early on, with the exception of this, where there is review taking place with DEQ, but very late in the game, about 5 or 6 days before our meetings, it's getting a second, essentially professional level review, raising new issues in some cases again. And my suggestion would be that we start that, if we're going to do it that way, start getting that second professional review started earlier, so we could have some back and forth. Meaning that the staff would provide these water reports to us as soon as possible, so we can start taking a look then rather than the last 5 or 6 days.
Okay, and those have all been discussed, and we will take those up in due course in our regular meetings. So my preference would be not to prevail upon our commissioners any further and let us all get back to our afternoons. If there's nothing else, no objections, I'm looking at the screen and my comrades in the room. Meeting is adjourned. Thank you. See you next week. What's that? Oh, I'm sorry. I didn't, did we adjourn? We'll do it. Can we do that at our meeting? Sweet. Does that work for you guys?
Yeah.
Okay. Sorry.
Now I'm definitely confused. Well, I thought we were going to talk about that. Now it's like, well, maybe that was just something we were.
No, we were going to, so we didn't get that far. I just feel like you guys are coming to these meetings and let's try to move things in order. So my apologies, but I don't think there's an issue there. Thank you, Joe. You should have screamed at me and frowned more fiercely.
Yeah, blame it, Joe.
Thank you, Joe.
Good to see you all. Thanks for showing up.
Hi, everyone.
Jeff.
Yes.
I had some feedback from our November meeting where your comments explaining what a PERC test was were appreciated. So I'll pass that. So,
Well, I didn't even want to bring this up today. But correctly speaking, to do a PERC test, you must saturate the sediments first.
okay. All right.
And since their sediments are completely unsaturated,
Yeah.
it makes the PERC test even less useful for our purpose.
Our meeting adjourned. We're not discussing PERC tests. I just wanted to pass along that compliment from our meeting.
Yeah, no, not a problem.
Thank you for that.
But I didn't bring it up. It's another can of worms.
All right. Thank you all.